Can you see that full screen now?
Sure can.
Okay, good deal. All right, so I'm Frank Hernandez, AKA the Pest Geek, and I am the owner of Nature Pest in Miami. I've been doing pest control for going on 15 years now, and as a certified operator for going on 12. And I had the privilege of, back in 2016, a bunch of doctors from FIU contacted me that they were doing an asthma study, and they saw that I was doing classic technical IPM, and they wanted to do a study for an asthma project and to see what the reduction of asthma would be in the inner city. This was in Liberty City, Miami, in HUD homes. And we went ahead and did a pilot study for them for 6 months on 10 units. And it was very challenging. And then later on, after 1 year, they were able to get the funding based on that success of that pilot study to do basically an entire community and test it on a large community scale. And there was about 120, 140 units available, and we were able to do about 88. You can actually see the presentation that she did regarding the results of the preliminary pilot study that led to the full-blown study. So we will be in a published study in a scientific journal sometime in the near future with this. Oh, great. Now the slide isn't working. All right. So can you guys see that one moving?
I can see now it says eco-friendly approach to German roach control.
Got it. All right. So we're going to go with that because it's been somehow this is really challenging for a minute. All right. So this is what we're going to be discussing is our process that we used we already had somebody's probing me to see if the video will start. I'm going to go ahead and do that.
Hey, Frank, can you make it full screen? Because it's not full screen.
That's what I'm trying to see of what. There it is. All right. Okay, now it did. Now it did. Now it did it. And what we are here is to get through this. The conditions. These were very, very, very bad conditions. Hygiene was non-existent. These were the conditions of the wall. Exclusion was non-existent. We had to prove our protocols, and we used a lot of the studies that we had developed from Brenner at the USDA, at the University of Florida with Philip Kohler, a lot of the things that they had published, and we had been testing those for years. And this really pushed us to grow in what we believed our protocols were. There's an actual, most of the units that we dealt with, about 30% of them were in this condition, 40%. This is actually roach feces and carcasses inside an outlet. Even the plugs are completely clogged up with roach feces. This is basically carcasses and feces. You can see that the hygiene wasn't there. Those are fingerprints on the cabinets, the condition of the exhaust. This is actually just the condition of the feces and scattering. If you can look up the top right-hand corner, you'll see the outlet with feces all around it. And these are actual webs, and there's even Oothecas hanging from that. So very, very challenging environment to test. And we were using our protocols that we used in food service, but we were challenged because we couldn't do traditional pest control. There could be no pesticide sprays. It had to be classic IPM, baits, monitors, dust baits, very little dusting because there was asthma. If they had 4 kids living there, chances are that all of them had asthma due to these conditions. So we were very under strict protocols. Before I get into the actual presentation and get into the biology, just do a quick anatomy for you guys. I don't know how many people here are brand new to pest control or I've never done an anatomy apart, but the German roach is an insect. It belongs to the class of Insecta. So therefore it's going to have 2 antennae. We're moving from right to left. going to have two eyes. The head is actually in the front. The back part where the lines are, where that is actually the prothorax, is part of the thorax. You've got the abdomen, and it's not seen. It's three body parts. All insects are going to have three body parts, but it's covered by the wings. And then you have the cerci. Now, the cerci is an interesting body part because it detects movement. If you try to come up behind a roach and they run, is because they can detect air movement. So they use that as part of a sensory organ. It is attached to their abdomen, but it's connected to their legs. So before they can actually, the brain really receive stuff, the legs are taking off. You've got the Ootheca, which is your egg casing. Most people call them eggs. They're not eggs. They're egg casings. The eggs are actually inside and they hatch. You've got a pair of wings, and you have your legs, your tibia, your femur, and your tarsus. And this is important, especially when you're doing other types of identification. When you get to ants, I found this to be very helpful. In German roach, it's pretty easy. The lines in the back of the thorax is a giveaway on the size, but that's an easy way to identify. The mouth is usually not seen because it's underneath, but the eyes are connected right to the head. Is taxonomy important? Not really in German cockroach, because it's really one genus and one species. But I would like you to be aware of taxonomy, especially when you're starting to do research, the way I do. If you're really into research, it's going to help you with understanding genuses, especially when you get into ant species where you have so many genuses and the orders. That's going to be your help. So not too much there. The client really doesn't care about this. This is for your knowledge, for your education. So we'll get into biology of the German cockroach, which is important. They're synanthropic pests, meaning that they're used to living among people. They're used to invading structures where people live, and that's what synanthropic means. They're purely domestic. Now, they cannot survive outdoors. You can see them outdoors. We saw them outdoors when we were treating door frames with thousands and thousands of roaches in the area. The roaches were walking down, and they will go from one unit to another outside, but they can't survive. They're not like American cockroaches. They love tight spaces, and this is vitally important for pest control people to know, because they're thigmotactic. That's what that term means, that they are a lover of tight spaces, cracks and crevices. This is why it's so important when you're doing German roach to really, really, really focus on the cracks and crevices, all of them, and where you think they might not fit, they're going to be in there. And when I see failure in pest control, even from my own technicians, it's usually because they ignored something in the protocol that was there. So they like warm, humid temperatures. This was a huge challenge for us because these places that we were dealing with did not have any air conditioning. So you're here in South Florida, you're in Miami, you're in the summer, you're at 90 plus degrees and 100% humidity. Nymphal development, egg development is at a maximum. This is your worst case scenario. And this is what we were challenged with, because at 74 to 83 degrees, incubation for nymphal development is optimal. So in South Florida, everybody keeps their home between that 74 to 78 degrees during the day, and maybe it might go between 74 to 70 at night if they really want to sleep really cold and comfy. So this is where we were having a huge challenge on our hands. There is an incomplete metamorphosis. There's only 3 life stages: egg, nymph, and adult with roaches. It's not like flies or ants that have complete metamorphosis. And that's one of the questions I think we have on the for them to answer. One of the challenge questions is on there. The entire life cycle from egg to adult is about 100 days. And this is vitally important on if you're doing German roach control, that if you do a one-time service, you're pretty much guaranteed to fail. And if you're doing 2 services or 3 services, you're still going to have to do a follow-up probably at about 90 days, because that's when you will start seeing the new development of that generation. So that is vitally important that you, if you're doing services, that somehow in your protocols, you have a follow-up. Because if you wait for the customer to determine whether they have a problem again, your monitors and the way you put those out, which we're going to discuss and how we did that based on a study that was published, we were able to do very good monitoring. So females are going to live between 140 and 280 days. Males live between 90 and 140 days. So in a year, I mean, in less than a year, you could have a big generational problem with German roaches if you're not monitoring. And that's one of the biggest failures that you treat apartment units, especially in lower income areas. And you solve that problem, and 90 days after and a year later, they're back at it where they were, especially in multi-unit. The first Ootheca will hatch. It will be produced between 8 to 10 days after they become an adult. Now, the one Ootheca takes about 6 weeks to totally produce and start to hatch. And in a life cycle in the average roach, you're going to be between 4 and 9 Ootheca during her lifetime. That's important because of duplication. If unattended, we understand that you can get up to 10,000 roaches in about 12 to 15 months in a structure. And this is what we ended up with in this case. An Ootheca contain up to 48 eggs and get about 48 hatching, but typically you're going to be with somebody somewhere between 30 and 40. When customers talk to you about, it's just not that many roaches. It's a tip of the iceberg. What they're not seeing, it's what's important, and helping them understand that the egg production or the larval production on this, the nymph production on this from 30 to 40 is a lot when you're considering that you can have 200 roaches and, half of those might be, carrying an Ootheca. So she can do about 200 to 250. There's been as much as 350 documented in a lifetime of a German roach, which is less than a year. So you can see the potential problem trying to explain this to your clients. Adult females release, and we're going to get into mating, and a pheromone attractant. Now, females is interesting because they can mate once, or they can mate multiple times, and just one mating can produce enough Oothecas for a lifetime, providing there's enough sperm available to her to be able to inseminate those eggs. Females initiate a calling 5 to 7 days after the imaginal molt. Now, the imaginal molt is the last molt. So understand that just really quickly, 5 to 6 days, as early as 4 days, she can go ahead and start initiating mating calls with a pheromone. And the calling, maximum calling, is usually 6 to 7 days after that imaginal molt when they start. And if not mated, she can continue to call for 3 to 4 days. And this continues for 24 hours before ovulation. Now, this is interesting. They did a study and they showed that males, 80% of males prefer virgins, and only 20% chose mated females. That could be an interesting conversation to have with your clients. Calling is completely suppressed once they are mating, and then the process starts all over again afterwards. At room temperatures, development on the nymphs is going to be about 60 days. And this is why it's important that we develop, when it comes to German cockroach, entomologically based programs versus programs that are based just on whatever the material motive is. So you can do a one-time service and understand that you're going to have maybe 2 services. On 80% of the cases, we can solve it in 2 services, but there's going to have to be a follow-up, most likely before 90 days, to ensure that we're getting the control. And in your stages between, the nymphal stages are molts. That's for basic biology there. Let's talk about feeding, because feeding is really important, especially in this model that we used, because we were not allowed to use any pyrethroids, any neonics, any liquid sprays. We were dealing exclusively with baiting. This was we had to prove that this protocol worked in order to reduce allergens, but also the exposure to the pesticide. This was a very, very strict study, and we had to get this right. So increased feeding for females, we're talking about females now, is right before forming Ootheca production. Peak feeding and drinking occurs during the egg maturation period, but it terminates abruptly right before the appearance of the egg case. So she walks around and eats and feeds, but once this happens, there's going to be very little movement. And this is where we found about understanding bait placement in the studies and understanding this biology, where bait placement has to be really tight. Before you were told bait placement to be 2 to 3 feet apart, we found that bait placements closer together were actually better. During this time, she's carrying the egg case. She's going to feed very, very, very sparingly. Now, they are omnivorous. They will eat oils, protein, carbohydrate, sugars. We were initially using, and before we did this study, we were using borates, and we were using primarily borates that were water soluble, that we can treat areas with areas that had oil and grease to turn those areas into bait. We decided that was not going to be the case because we could not move those stoves. Those stoves were connected to gas. And we do this in food service where we use the borates, but we could not do it. We were limited here because we could not move those stoves to treat the grease areas. Now, locomotion. So we talked about feeding, and now we're going to talk about locomotion of females. They are highly mobile when they're sexually receptive. The locomotion reaches a peak right before the formation of the Ootheca. So now you have feeding stops and also movement stops. And the locomotion for food right now pretty much decreases during pregnancy. So she barely feeds, she barely moves. Feeding takes place immediately following the discharge of the Ootheca. Process starts all over again, and activity increased 5 days later when females became sexually receptive. Again, understanding that life cycle of how long this is going to take, which is about 30 days. You have to deal with that if you're not getting all the places where they're going to be. Increased activity is 2 days before the end of the pregnancy. She starts to move around again. And probably because she's looking for a place to deposit that Ootheca, but realize that most of the time it's going to birth right there, right on her. All right, so let's talk about the actual process of the service. And I'm just making sure that everybody's still hearing me because I can't see anybody. So is everybody still hearing me okay?
I can hear you. And for anyone that has their microphone muted, please feel free to answer in the chat.
Yeah. And then you're going to have to give me the questions that they asked so I can answer them, because obviously I don't know if I can see them right now. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just reminding everybody, if you have some questions, and there's a lot of great information we've been getting this morning, please feel free to use that box.
Yep. And hopefully I'll have enough time to answer them afterwards. So we were using this method. This is what we used right here. We used vacuuming for roaches. We used air for flushing because we couldn't use pyrethroids. And since we were using baits, that is one of the number one causes of bait failure, is using pyrethrum for flushing and then immediately going in and using bait. So we were using air, compressed air. We had an air compressor. We'll show you that. And gel bait, we used dust bait, and the dust bait we were using at that time was Avert. A lot of the studies show that Avert in actual control is really a maximum of 20%. So it's a layered product, but we will not going to depend on Avert for our main product, but we use it in places where we know we can. And insect growth regulators was a must, and monitors, and we're going to discuss where monitoring is best. So vacuuming, the good thing about vacuuming is that you remove all the live roaches. 100% of the roaches you don't have to kill, and it reduces the amount of bait you need, because bait is expensive. If you have large population of roaches and they're eating all of your bait, immediately it could turn into a mass consumption of bait. We were, to put this way, every inch of some of these homes were infested. They had the entire kitchen infested, dining room was infested, any furniture in there was infested. If you were going down the hallway, they had the old threshold that were glued, and they were completely removed. And behind all of the thresholds throughout this entire unit, there were thousands leading up the stairs, down the hallway, into the bathrooms. The bedrooms were completely infested. Some of these units took 6 to 8 hours to do a complete clean out with 2 people. So you can imagine. Now, the vacuum we did use is a Atrix vacuum, which has a HEPA three-phase filtration, because we did not want anything in the air, especially when we were having asthma problems, because the allergens from these roaches were a major problem. So removing the allergen from the area was vital. We removed the carcasses and oothecas, which also carry allergen and also carry diseases. So surprisingly enough, there were no diseases, but when we asked the doctors that were part of the study, says, well, they've already have it in their gut and they've become adapted to it. If we had this problem in a restaurant, you would probably have severe E. coli issues with people having food poisoning. But in this case, there wasn't any because of that. We talk about.
If I may, Frank, let me just interrupt for a second, if you don't mind. We have a great question. The question is, what's the percentage of nymphs, males to females, during the life cycle of the female?
Oh, that's a very good question. The studies show that it's usually about an 80-20. So 80% are going to be nymphs, 20% are going to be adults in the area. And male to female is going to be tough, because I don't think we have a study yet, mass study to do that, but that I haven't read. But it is about, and we're going to see it in the monitors that when I'm going to show you, that it is about an 80-20 split. I hope that answers the question. So
Thank you so much for that, Frank.
You're welcome. And what you can see is we have, we did air flushing. This is actually the tip. We had a compressor. We had a 3-gallon compressor, and we compressed the air, and we had it very low. So we just basically needed to blow out the roaches because you can't get them out. They'll grip really tight to the cracks and crevices, and vacuum alone is not going to get them out. So we basically flushed it out, and we would get basically 90-something% of those roaches out of there, where we would see, after we stop air movement, we would then see only nymphs coming out, and we could continue to vacuum, and then we would just leave it alone because we knew the air. So cabinets, inside door frames, thresholds, we had to do this too, baseboards, appliances. Back of refrigerator. This is common in food service, where you have to flush the motor housings of all the refrigeration units. This is a great way to do it, where you can get them out. And what you do is just have the wand in one hand, the vacuum in the other, and as you're flushing, you're basically flushing and picking up at the same time. Furniture was a challenge, because they had furniture, the dining room sets underneath were all full of roaches. We just vacuum all of those up. Anywhere we found and we spotted, we did this to them. Here is your monitor. And this is what we picked up from a severe job that we did. And there's actually a study that was done that actually did show the best places to monitor. The extensive study, I remember when I first started out in the industry, we would see all the monitors underneath the water pipes, and people would just, glue them to underneath the water pipes, and we never caught roaches, and people were complaining they were finding roaches. Actually, it turns out that is one of the worst places to put a monitor. It's not the best. The best is actually behind the stove or near the stove, and beside or behind or under refrigerators. Some refrigerators we were able to move to be able to treat. Others we were not able to move. They were so in place because of how old they were, how heavy. This was a huge challenge of baiting and being able to flush and move things out because they couldn't be moved. But we find today that is standard. We put it either behind, we pull if we can't move the stove, we pull out the warming tray, which most people think is for storing your items. It's actually warming tray. We move that on underneath. We were able to put the monitor back there. We push it back into place. And now we have an easy place to monitor and visualize how many roaches we're having when we're doing our follow-up services. Also fridge. And then the least place where you caught roaches were like right beside the toilet. Putting monitors there produced the least amount of roaches. We find that kitchen. So that's where we standardize it now. If we also have a dishwasher, we try to slide them underneath. I like these monitors because we has a very large area of you to monitor. They're going to walk right over it, and you can slide it underneath things and then be able to pull them out very easily. So if anybody has questions up to that point, feel free to interrupt me there. But we basically have IGR, and what we used for this study was the point source hydroprene, S-hydroprene. Because of all the studies we've done previous to that, it reduces the amount of labor. It is an expensive product, but the labor to do IGR treatments when you're doing crack and crevice is much higher. This saves you an enormous amount of money on labor. Hydroprene and pyriproxyfen are the two that are really available to us that are juvenile hormone mimics. And the way this works in roaches is that roaches, in order to molt to the next stage, they have to lose the hormone. What this does is it keeps the hormone in the environment and prevents them from molting completely. Something is lacking. Now, the way juvenile hormone mimics work is they mimic that juvenile hormone. Pyriproxyfen has been shown that you have to put it, and it has to make contact. They've used it in bait. It has to make contact where hydroprene doesn't. Hydroprene volatilizes in the environment. And when it volatilizes in the environment, if you've got a 100 square foot area, all of that area is going to be, they've done studies where they've applied it upstairs and have found it downstairs. So we use it about every 90 days. We switch it out, and we find that this was very, very effective in our control as a long-term strategy. So we don't have, and we use it exclusively on our maintenance service. So we find that we put this, studies have shown that if you do it for 6 to 9 months, you can literally control a German roach population in a year by just using the IGR, because there's no molting happening. So in our maintenance service, we use it exclusively, and then we don't have to rebate. We don't have to apply anything. We're just monitoring at that point and making sure, and maybe using avert in some voids if we have void situations. But that right there keeps us in apartments, and we do a lot of apartments down here. It's about 20 to 30% of our business, single unit apartments in multi-unit housing, where we get hired to do condos and multi-unit. The other one is a chitin synthesis inhibitor, Nevarolon. Nevarolon is only available really in one product, which is together with pyriproxyfen. It's Tico. It's available, but it's a chitin synthesis inhibitor. And what that does is German roaches or insects that are in the class of Insecta will use chitin, and chitin is that crunchy exoskeleton. So the chitin is produced by it's a polymer basically made out of cellulose, and it makes the exoskeleton. Nevarolon prevents them from creating the exoskeleton. But we find that with hydroprene for German roaches, it suffices. It can be added if you're doing a crack and crevice service. Understand that you do need to make contact. It just doesn't sit in the environment. So remember, I told you about thigmotactic. If you don't bring your A game that day, you are not sure you're hitting every crack and crevice, this is not going to work for you. This is why I like, because technician error is the number one problem that we have in trying to make sure that we can get the control. Here is underneath on the bottom of that monitor, you see the effect of hydroprene. This was actually pulled from one of ours, and you see the deformed wings. They're all damaged, deformed, and the twisted wing is the number one know that hydroprene is working. The Ootheca production is reduced. They will drop the Ootheca. They will abort the egg, the Ootheca. So that's one of the things that I like using it, and reduce copulation. There's less sexual activity. There's damaged organs, in the male, damaged penises. So we reduce the sexual reproduction by using hydroprene. It's a lot of people don't use it, and we find that this is just an incredible tool to get control. Now, let's talk about baiting and bait failure. And this happens with new technicians for us, even sometimes when they get lazy. The three things that cause bait failure is going to be technician error, not putting the bait in the proper place. Again, understanding being thigmotactic. You can't just put it in open. We've all seen it. Somebody put a strip of bait in the middle of a backsplash. That is the absolute worst place to put gel bait. It has to be in the cracks and crevices. What we discovered through this whole process in doing this for 3 years is that we were told by the manufacturers and the old time that you put bait, 2 feet apart. What we found is that by using smaller amount of bait, closer together, about 1 foot apart. And what we do is we use a grid system. We use on the top, if you got a 36-inch cabinet, you're going to get 3 dots. You're going to get them in the corner, preferably in the crack, and then one in the middle. That's going to give you that real small range for German females to walk across. And then we do it along the side in the front, and we use this grid system where we're using a cube grid, 1 foot everywhere, especially in the underneath the cabinets. On the top ones, if you've got 12 inches, what we find works best is just putting the bait right between the shelves, in the little cracks of the shelves, and if you have to, on the inside of the hinges, but you put them way inside, very small amount. We're looking about 1/8 of an inch versus that 1/4 inch ball. And what's going to be is the follow-ups, how many you have to do. If you do this consistently throughout, we actually have a demo video. You can go on my YouTube channel and find it, of how we actually perform it. It's a step-by-step. It's available there to you. And then the other thing is, when you're doing extensive baiting, and people who do baiting will tend to do baiting for maintenance. It's totally useless. If the roach isn't there, baiting for maintenance, when roaches aren't there, you're going to build up the bait. And then what happens is there is bait avertment. Because of the bait that's building up. So once a roach decides, I'm not going to eat this, and you put out fresh bait and you do have a problem, you're going to decide maybe she's not going to eat it. So that is the two things. The other is insecticide resistance. Now, it isn't widespread. It isn't like this is a massive problem. It's been found in 3: hydromethylnon, fipronil, and indoxacarb. The reason is there's more research on these 3 than any other available. So if you want to do research, there's a lot of extensive material on it, where a lot of the neonicotinoids, there isn't a whole lot, especially the newer ones that are being used. But in this case, you find evidence. The first evidence was found of hydromethylnon resistance. There was moderate resistance to fipronil and extremely high resistance to indoxacarb. And that is still not understood yet. It's been found in all of the resistance have been pulled from multi-unit apartment buildings. There's one in Tampa, and I forget where the other ones are. But my suspicion, when I see a lot of resistance problems, we all know that indoor application of fipronil to try to control problems is used, and you have indoxacarb available to you as a spray. no research is done where they did swab analysis to show that there was fipronil in the environment where it wasn't supposed to be. I would highly suspect that, but it isn't like we've never experienced an insecticide resistance where they ate all the bait and the roaches were still there, or we didn't have any mortality. Haven't been seen it yet, especially in single family homes. This is why we don't do bait rotation. When we're doing single family homes, we only do it in food service. And be fine. We knock it out and it's done once it's taken care of. The other one is going to be bait aversion. This is the big one. I talked to a lot of technicians around the country who are still using flushing, and they're doing still pyrethroid applications together with baiting. And most of the time, it's going to be that combination of I didn't put the bait exactly where that roach was, and then I did put it where she wasn't, and it got exposed to a pyrethroid. So the whole thing about you're going to bait high and spray low, if you're doing lower cabinets and you're using products that are contaminating the bait, it's going to be a problem. In using pyrethroid flushing, and then you have to wait a week or more to come back and do baiting. If you're trying to do it at the same time, it's going to fail. The other one is customer sabotage, where the customer will have that can of aerosol raid, and she'll come behind you, or he'll come behind you and decide going to help you out and spray the entire area. Usually if I find them, I usually try to throw them out for them. I said, you don't need this anymore. We're done with this. And we throw this out to prevent that, because we know it's going to happen. There's also a unique phenomenon in a study where they found there's glucose aversion. And the problem with glucose, it is used in baits because they eat it. But the problem is there's strains that are finding of German roaches that have aversion to glucose. The problem is they also pass it down genetically to the nymphs if they hatch. And there is a resistance. So if you're finding they're not eating the bait and you have not used pyrethroid, you suspect there's no contamination, they're not eating it, switch out the bait, because it could be an aversion. The problem is we don't know what the bait matrix is. This is proprietary information. They don't give us this. The only thing we can do is actually just swap out the bait. Any question? Yes.
Yes, actually, we do have a great question. The question is, what is your recommendation for heavily infested units? Like, recommend vacuuming first and then baiting? How about spraying?
We do zero. We actually have a policy in our services, all of them, that we have an exclusive zero spray service. Spraying is not necessary. Unless if you want to use spraying, you can. I would go with a crack and crevice with a non-repellent product. If you're going to use it, if it's required by your company that you have to use it, go to a non-repellent, because you're not going to contaminate the bait. And we do recommend that, yes, you do vacuum first and remove everything first, then you make your chemical application.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Frank. If you want to go ahead.
Thank you. All right,
I'm sorry. Actually, I'm so sorry. Another great question.
Okay.
Is it legal to apply bait to a folded wax paper instead of a real crack and crevice?
Well, if there's no violation of the label is going to be your law. I know people use the cardboard, fold up the little paper and put it underneath. If it doesn't say specifically that you can't, because you can put it into open spaces. It in a crack is the way that you want to do it because of the biology. It does not say anywhere. You can actually put a line on most products in an area that isn't a crack. It's just a corner somewhere. So yes, you could do that. It's extensively done especially where you can't reach behind that refrigerator, like I was talking about. You might want to be able to, attach it to a string. You drop it down and you're able to tape that string to the wall. So when you come back, you can remove it because you can't move it. You get into a lot of situations where you can. So absolutely, if the label doesn't prohibit it, yes, you can do it. I don't see an issue with it. With that, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. Just checking to see if there are any other questions coming up. Okay, nothing in the Q&A. Thank you, Frank.
Yep. All right. So we're going to get into mode of action and understanding, because a lot of the times what we think is there's a whole not a lot available, and there's really a lot for us available. People say, well, baits don't work. It's usually because of the old practices. I tell people, look, trust me on this, put the B&G down, let it go, try it and do it and follow the instructions and put the B&G down and start and watch how much more effective your bait becomes when you're forced yourself to actually do it. But there's mode of action. Fipronil is available. It's a class 2 Fiprol. It's a GABA-gated chloride channel blocker. And what the way baits work are, they're all going to be neural products except for borates. They're going to work by either closing channel in the neurons or opening them. You either keep it open and you block it, or you modulate it and it oscillates by closing. This one blocks it, keeps that GABA-gated chloride, so the system gets flooded with chloride and the roach dies. So Fiprols are available to you. The next class that's becoming very popular, we started out with imidacloprid, and dinotefuran and clothianidin is available. Clothianidin is probably one of the more newer ones, and so is dinotefuran. It's a class 4 neonicotinoid. It's a neonicotinic acetylcholine receptor competitive modulator. So you're going to get the modulation. And they're very effective. They're all non-repellents. Oh, by the way, all baits, I get this question a lot. Is there a repellent bait? No, you couldn't have a repellent product like a pyrethrum or a pyrethroid used in a bait. These are all non-repellent, which if you're going to be using baits with non-repellents, these active ingredients will work for you together. So you can use an imidacloprid with a Fiprol bait, and you can use that combination.
And Frank, we actually have another question about bait. Natalia is wondering, can you place a bait on the glue traps?
Yes, you can. There's always there is debate among that. We actually do that when we can't access the area. We will take the bait, put it on around the edges outside of the glue board. We will slide it underneath the fridge, and you saw that bait that board completely full. That's one of the cases we actually did it. You can see there was zero bait there. They ate it all. There's question whether it defeats the purpose of the bait of the horizontal transfer of the bait. What we found is that we didn't see a big difference. We caught them anyway. They're going to be walking around. Remember, if you catch them, they're no longer breeding. They're no longer doing their activity. So it's going to be, try it. Try it both ways, see what you get. I like experimenting. I like doing this stuff. I take these chances because it either proves things wrong or it doesn't. So I would just go ahead and try that. But yes, we do it extensively on that.
Thank you so much for that, Frank.
Yep. So now you have avermectins. There's only two. You have abamectin, which is what you find in Avert. It's also available in bait gel and emamectin benzoate. These are our glutamate-gated chloride channel activators. So they work very well, especially in a low-impact environment. It's derived from a bacterium. So again, it's a very good product, and so there hasn't been. I don't in using it in Aversion, like I said, we found that it's only the studies show, and our experience shows that it is about 20%, but in gel bait, very, very effective in a gel bait form there.
Okay, and Frank, we do have another question. Kevin's wondering, actually, Brent, where are there bait tube extensions available to reach the hard to reach areas? So where can you get those types? Yeah.
So there's a company called Exacticide, which makes the Exacticide applicator, and they have a 22-inch, which we use. It's a 22-inch extension wand. I believe they're like $60, $70 from Exacticide. You can look at it's called the Tech Reach, where you put the bait on the tip. and you're going to hit the plunger or a gun. I don't use guns. I use the plunger. I get more control with the bait than I do with a gun. It's more precise for me. But yes, you can reach. We use them all the way up to 8 feet. I'm 5'10", and I can reach 8 feet to do lights. If you're doing light treatments around lights, top cabinets where you don't want to remove the glasses, you can reach it. It's a great product. You can get it from Exacticide.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Yeah, so indoxacarb is one of the ones we really love, and there's a reason for that, and I'll give you a little bit of history on it. It's the only one that has been shown in studies to have what is known as a tertiary or quaternary kill effect. And what happens with transfer, horizontal transfer, is let's say the German cockroach eats the bait, it's dying. A nymph comes by, first instar nymph comes by, eats the bait, dies. An adult male comes by and eats the nymph. Well, now you have a secondary kill, and then you have a tertiary kill. Well, this process can happen again. Indoxacarb seems to have at a 6%, which is I think what they're using. It transfers very well through the feces, through the body. It doesn't break down in the metabolism. And it allows for transfer where you can only get with fipronil, sometimes a secondary, also with hydromethanol, you only get secondary. This is the only one that's been studied to do that. It's an oxidizine, voltage channel, sodium, a voltage-dependent sodium channel blocker. And it's the one we use, which is the Aversion bait. We've had no reason to rotate it because we're doing one-and-done services. Remember, German roaches have to be reintroduced to the environment. If we're doing food service where there's a constant because of the product, yes, you want to rotate your chemical actives because you're going to get a resistance problem over time. But in certain environments, it's really not needed to rotate the bait. If the roach is dead, it's not being reintroduced. It can't, resurrect from the dead. So that's one of the things. Now we got boric acid and borates. Boric acid will work, especially in a dust form. There's borates actually, and like you got a products like Nibor D, which you can use in a void, which is very eco-friendly. Dusting it. You can also reduce it in water to do crack and crevice. It will work. And you can also apply it to grease and food areas that are not going to get cleaned, and they're not going to get cleaned. It turns the bait. It turns that area into bait. And that's one of the things I love doing it in food service, especially when you're behind all of those appliances. There's grease in the corners. They're not getting that grease out. They can't move those gas stoves that weigh 300 pounds. By applying in those areas, you will find you get really good control with borates. The way borates work is insects can't metabolize the borate, and they don't have kidneys. And what happens is when they eat it, that ceases the defecation, and water builds up in their system, and so does sodium, and it kills them. That's how borates work. In gel bait, we found that it's not really that effective for German. We found that it's really more effective, like your magnetic bait, for using for American roach. What we found is for American roach, we also use the Aversion for nymphs, and when we're doing a dual mode treatment, it works really well but you're putting it at that large 2-foot with American, just a freebie there, and to get going with that. All right, so time to kill. Time to kill is important. We live in a society where people want it quick. They waited till the evening before Thanksgiving, and now they want you to come out and knock out all their roaches so they're not embarrassed for Thanksgiving dinner. It's not going to happen, and especially when you're using baits. Time to kill at 95 to 100% in a lab. Okay, this is not field. This is in vitro. 28 hours per clothianidin, 32 hours for fipronil, and indoxacarb is the slowest. This is probably why indoxacarb is also so effective. Slower is better. The longer it takes to kill that insect, the better a male has at going back to the area they're in. They don't have nest. People say the nesting site. They don't have nest. They nest in areas. It's going to be very good for the slower to be. Now we're only talking a difference of about hours, which is about a day. So if you apply baits, you're pretty much going to start seeing mortality. You want it to take longer, the longer the possible. And these are the three that have, some of the most studies behind them. Now,
Frank,
yes.
Would you like to take a break and maybe put up a poll question?
Yeah. So you got one of the poll questions there?
I sure do. I'll go ahead and launch this one.
Yeah.
And then what we'll do, if you folks would all go ahead and answer in the box, if you're finding that you're not able to click on the pop-up, you can answer in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we share your results. Now, these poll questions do not affect your test grade, so don't worry about that. So here we go. Here's the first question. And the question is, what type of metamorphosis do German roaches have? Option 1, complete. Option 2, incomplete. Okay, folks are answering pretty quickly on this one. Okay, I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds. Okay, so we wanted to wait till at least 85% of the folks answered. Well, 91+% have answered. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. Looks like everyone was able to get in. And 86% said incomplete, 14% said complete. Let's go ahead and share those results. Okay. So, Frank, what do you think about that? The responses here.
Yeah, no. So it's incomplete. We covered that at the beginning of the class. And so you're going to be hard pressed to find larvae and pupae if you're doing inspections, because they're not there. If you have a complete metamorphosis, they wouldn't be there.
Okay. Did you want to do another poll? Because I know you've got 3 questions.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Do them all, actually, because we've covered it.
Excellent. Okay,
yeah, we've already covered it.
I'm going to stop this one. Alrighty, let's go on to the next question. Okay, and again, you can click here or answer in the Q&A box if you're having any difficulty. We're going to wait till we have about 85% of the folks answer. And the question is, it's true or false? Female German roaches attract males by rubbing antennas together. Is that true or false? Wow, another one where folks are answering very quickly. Okay, we're at 68% of the folks. 81%, 86%. Okay, we're going to give it a couple more seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and end that polling. So 86% have voted. So 74% said false and 26% said true. So Frank, I'm going to let you answer that. And then I guess we're getting close to time.
Yep.
So I'm going to stop sharing that and I'll let you finish. Thank you.
So thank you. Yeah, so it's actually pheromone. They emit a pheromone, not rubbing their antennas. So what do we know about the biology of why the baits work and they work better than traditional spray service? Well, roaches do things like eat their feces, they eat vomits, and they eat their own. And those are the entomological responses on the right. But what we find is, let me go here. Something happened. There we go. All right. So In emetophagy is different than trophallaxis. People say, well, German roaches don't feed their young through vomit, through trophallaxis, like ants and termites do. And you're absolutely correct. They don't. But here's what happens. When the studies that they've done of what happens when they eat certain types of active ingredients, it's producing some type of enzymic effect that we don't understand it. But fipronil stimulates the cockroach to regurgitate when it's dying, liquid excretions. What they discovered is that the first instar nymphs are highly attracted to that vomit. And this is where horizontal transfer takes place. Okay. So what they found is indoxacarbs were actually not attracted to the oral region. They were actually attracted to the rectal region of the roach. And so they're going to be, this is caprophagy, where it can be both somodal and anal on both sides. And then with hydromethanol, what they found is it caused severe defecation before death. You see, so the bait passes through the system onto the feces, and then the roaches will then eat it. And this is how the horizontal transfer works. So it works differently with different active ingredients. It doesn't always work the same way. Now, indoxacarb plays a role as starved adult consumed first-time nymphs. You see, so so there's enough in the system inside their gut that they can actually kill an adult roach. And roaches die soon after ingesting fipronil, which a lot of it is also retained in the system. So it's not really passed that much through the feces, but it actually retains in the system. All right. And then if you're interested in all of these studies, I've got over 29 studies on everything from asthma to biology to feeding behavior, mating behavior. There's about 29 or 30 studies on there. There's the link. You can take a screenshot of that and go ahead. And if you've got any questions on the final, I'll be glad to take some questions. And that's going to conclude an eco-friendly approach to German roach control.
Okay, excellent. Frank, that was very, very informative. I cannot believe how much I learned today. So definitely appreciate you and all the time you put into this. I know we're running just a couple of minutes late, but figured, is there any questions before we let Frank go? Okay, here we go. Thank you. Anonymous attendee, if you would, shoot me a message so I know who you are so you don't miss out on anything. But the question they posed is this: what do you think about pheromone-based sticky traps? Are they worth the money?
In my opinion, we've used them both. We did not see a dramatic difference in how much we caught. We switched over the pheromone. They were about 3 times the price of the regular traps. We used the regular mice and glue boards now that are there's no pheromone. They're non-baited. We catch just as many as we did before with the pheromone one. So yeah, I haven't seen a difference. And that's in my experience. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for that. Okay. Any further questions? Because if not, it's probably time. Oh, we've got somebody else. Let me take a look. Okay. No, I guess we've answered everyone. So on that Excellent. Note, again, thank you so very much for being part of this presentation. And we look forward to seeing you. And again, what is the name of your podcast so we can check back in with you?
Yeah, look up Pest Geek Podcast. And it's all one word. You can look at it separate words altogether. You can find us on every major podcast outlet. We're going to be there.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much. So on that note, for all of my attendees, we're going to go ahead and release Frank and say thank you for the attendees. Your exam is about to start.